Paper trouble in America rarely arrives like thunder. It slips in under the door, thin, impersonal, smelling of ink and cold coffee. I've lived long enough to know a signature can be a promise or a trap. That evening, in the yellow kitchen light, wearing my late husband's worn cardigan, I listened to the dishwasher hum and looked at the DMV envelope lying in the center of the table like a chilled fish. My daughter-in-law smiled the way people do in church hallways. My son kept his eyes on the sugar bowl. Somewhere between them sat the line I wasn't sure I should cross. "Just for now, Mom," she said, perfume soft and floral. "Your name gets the better rate. We'll handle everything." My son added that familiar reassurance. Only a few months, easy as renewing library books. I picked up the envelope and felt the grain of the paper under my fingertip, the way a seamstress tests fabric. Printed boxes waited for ink. Everything looked so tidy you could almost trust it. "Let me read it," I said. The wall clock ticked in a steady, stubborn rhythm. I thought of the stories I've overheard at the diner. People signing, just to help, and ending up on the hook for somebody else's mess. Maybe this would be different. Maybe faith was a form of family, and family, a form of faith. Or maybe faith was how you stepped into holes you had already seen. We sat together. She turned the title toward me and tapped a square labeled owner. "Sign here. Leave buyer blank. The dealer will fill that part." She sounded like someone who had already asked all the right questions. My son clicked the pen open, a crisp, confident sound. I scanned the lines. VUN, model year, paint color, odometer reading. Nothing shouted danger. I wrote my name the way I've always written it. Letters a little shaky with age but legible, steady enough to hold in court or church. There it was, my signature, straight as a fence post. They gathered the papers back with efficient hands and thanked me until it felt like I'd done something heroic instead of merely convenient. The door closed. The dishwasher stopped. A small silence took the room by the shoulders. I started clearing the table, sliding the stack into my old brown file folder, the one that makes me believe in the myth of being on top of things. As I opened the folder, a sliver of paper slipped loose, a crumpled receipt from a roadside dealer, the date blurred by moisture or haste. In the corner, someone had written 2 words in ballpoint: "Slanting uphill prior salvage." The phrase sat in my lap like a stone. Salvage meant the car had been broken hard enough to earn a scar, then dressed up again and told to behave like it hadn't happened. I could feel the cold lift along my ankles from the draft under the back door. I tucked every sheet into the folder and smoothed the edges with my palm, as if quieting a stubborn child. Tomorrow I would call the insurance company, not for a friendly chat, but for email, written words that don't wiggle later. I would ask about named insured and primary driver, about who carries the weight when metal meets bad luck. People say the details are small. I have learned that the trap keeps its teeth there. I switched off the kitchen light and walked through the dark living room, thinking about the boundary I had given away, and how to stitch it back with ink, time, and a voice that does not tremble. Tomorrow, I told myself, I begin. By morning, my son had already done the thing he does best: tidy a mess with a text. "Got us a cheaper policy, Mom. You're just a name, promise." The word just did a lot of heavy lifting. Like a flimsy stool someone insists is a chair. I set the phone face down beside my coffee and watched the ring of steam drift off the cup like a spirit no one had invited. I called the insurance company because paper behaves better when it's read aloud to you. A cheerful recording told me my call might be monitored for quality and training. I thought about quality. I thought about training. When a live voice came on, she sounded 19 and invincible. "I see you're the named insured," she said, bright as a new penny. "Before we discuss the claim or coverage, I'll need a recorded statement. Are you okay with that?" There it was, the little mouth of the trap. "No recorded statements," I said, and kept my tone the way I keep my garden shears sharp but clean. "Email, please. I want the declarations page, the application, and any endorsements that mention drivers." The line went quiet the way people do when an older woman refuses to be polite. "Sure," she said finally, all vowels and caution. "You'll receive a link." I waited with the laptop open and my folder of brown papers within reach, the salvaged receipt like a splinter under the skin of the morning. The portal dinged, and there it was: policy declarations. I printed it because pixels are too slippery for serious things. The paper came out warm and smelling faintly of plastic and heat. Under drivers, a list my son's name listed. My daughter-in-law excluded until added. And then, in the kind of font chosen to look non-threatening, primary driver, my name. I laughed once, a short, unkind sound that surprised the dog. I haven't commuted in years. The form said I drive to work 11 miles each way, 5 days a week. It said I put 12,000 miles a year on a car I rarely borrow, and never at night. It said things about me the way strangers in a checkout line decide your favorite bread. I called my son. He answered on speaker. I could hear traffic, the hollow yawn of an overpass. "It's just how the agent set it up," he said. "Mom, don't worry. We'll change it later." Later, I've learned, is a warehouse where responsibility goes to nap. "Have the agent call me," I said, "today. And until it's changed, neither of you drives that car on my insurance." I could feel the cardigan at my elbows, the familiar pilling where grief wears in like a habit. After we hung up, I went back to the declarations page. I circled numbers with a red pen, wrote the representative's name and time at the top, underlined named insured. I Googled terms I had always let men in collared shirts explain: material misrepresentation, permissive use, non-owner affidavit. The coffee had gone cold. I drank it anyway. The bitterness like a ruler against the back of the tongue. People tell you the details are small, like the grit on a kitchen floor you can ignore until it's under your bare heel. But the bite is there. I set the cup down carefully so it wouldn't shake against the saucer and started a list of questions for the agent. Each one a stitch, pulling the seam of the story tight. Every box they checked without me, I would uncheck in ink. Every line they left blank, I would fill with my own handwriting. I breathed, steadying the tremor in my hands. If I was just a name, then today I would learn what my name could do. Morning light has a way of finding what's past due. It settled on the driveway, pale and honest, and on the tiny square at the corner of the plate, the sticker that was supposed to promise we belonged on the road. The color was wrong for the season. The year, a neat pair of numbers, had already stepped over the line. I stood with the trash bag in my hand, reading that inch of neglect the way you read a pulse. When my son came out jangling keys, I pointed. He kissed my cheek anyway. "I'll renew it online tonight, Mom. It's fine for now." For now is a phrase that always has a cliff behind it. By late morning, I'd rinsed the breakfast cups and set the brown folder on the table like a placemat for worry. The phone rang. Wind rushed through the speaker before his voice did. "Mom." They pulled me over. He tried for lightness and missed. "Expired registration." Could you come?" The officer's cruiser sat on the shoulder, lights throwing up patient color, as if reminding the day it could still surprise you. My son stood beside the car, hands loose at his sides, kid still in a way that churned something maternal and exasperated in me. The officer greeted me by my last name without being told it, the magic trick of databases. "Vehicle comes back registered to you, ma'am," he said, not unkind. "Sticker's out and the system shows the registration lapsed. Policy requires a tow." I looked at the car the way you look at a child who has grown into the wrong size truth. "Can't I renew it right now?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Not roadside," he said. "You'll need proof of current insurance and fees paid. Impound information is on this sheet." He held out a slip, official and weightless. Behind us, the tow truck backed up with a cough and a sigh, metal speaking to metal. Watching the car lift felt like watching an apology get hauled away before it was finished. I told my son to ride with me, and for 5 minutes he was 10 again, quiet in the passenger seat, scuffing the toe of his shoe against the mat. I said I'd do it tonight. He managed. "You said a lot of things," I answered, not raising my voice because the truth was loud enough. He reached for the radio. I turned it off. The citation arrived 2 days later in an envelope that matched the serious page of all the others. The name on the front was mine. Inside, there were numbers, fine, surcharge, storage fee accumulating by the day, and a line that described me the way the policy had registered owner. I held the paper and felt the tremor in my coffee before I felt it in my hands. Of course it landed here. The title wore my signature. The state doesn't know the architecture of your household. It knows whose ink is on which line. I read every word twice, then 3 times. The way you check a locked door after you've already turned the bolt. Outside, a delivery truck hissed to a stop and moved on, unbothered by stickers or dates. I slid the citation back into its sleeve and reached for the DMV envelope. I kept like a first aid kit. The flap rasped as it opened. Paper met paper with the click of a seatbelt. On the laptop, I found a calendar crowded with other people's emergencies. The first available slot was Thursday at 10:40 a.m., a rectangle of time that looked like a promise. I clicked confirm and wrote the confirmation number at the top of the brown folder in red pen. Registration. Proof of insurance. Possible release of liability. Questions about fees I hadn't agreed to pay, but might have to, because that is the algebra of owning and loving grown children. I closed the computer and rested my palm on the folder, feeling the steady thud of my own pulse through cardboard. There are traps that spring with a clang, and there are traps that tighten like a knot you thought you tied for safety. Either way, you use your hands to undo them, slow, firm, not stopping because you wish you hadn't tied it in the first place. On Thursday, I would start untying. At 1:13 a.m., the house felt like a held breath. The refrigerator clicked, the radiator ticked, and my phone lit the ceiling in a soft blue square. Her name on the screen, then her voice, tight, too fast, grief braided with inconvenience. I didn't wake you, did I? It's something happened. Words spilled, not in order. A bump at an intersection no one loves. A taillight in the rear view going from red to angry. No one was hurt. She said 3 times, as if repetition could turn a wish into a fact. Then the part that made the room tilt, she hadn't stayed. She had pulled into a dark side street and waited for her hands to stop shaking. She had driven home. There are crimes you commit with malice, and there are ones you commit with fear. The difference matters to a pastor. It matters less to paper. I sat up and pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of my nose until little stars flashed. Where is the car? I asked. Whose policy did you give them? I didn't give anyone anything, she said. He had my plate. He said he'd take care of it. A pause, like a skipped heartbeat. And, I think the card in the glove box still has your name. I didn't raise my voice. In my experience, midnight is the wrong time for volume and the right time for nouns. Go to bed, I said. No more driving. We'll speak in the morning. Sleep didn't come back. At 2:07 a.m., an email landed with the gentle chime that sounds friendly until you know better, notice of claim. It had a claim number and a sentence that wore politeness like a pressed shirt. As the named insured, we'll need your recorded statement to assess coverage. I stared at those 3 capitalized words as if they were a verdict, named. As if I had stood up in a crowd and volunteered. Before sunrise, I made coffee strong enough to lift the paint and dialed the insurer. The cheery hold music made me think of waiting rooms and test results. We'll be recording, the adjuster announced when she arrived on the line, already moving me onto a conveyor belt. No, I said. We'll be corresponding by email. Send the declarations page, application, and endorsements. Send the report you received from the other driver. Send the timestamp. She didn't like it. You can tell when someone frowns over the phone by the way their vowels deflate, but she agreed. Fear is contagious, so is certainty. When the documents came through, I printed them. Warm pages, the smell like a copy shop after a rain. Under drivers, my son listed. My daughter, in-law not listed. Under use, commuting, attributed to me as if I'd climbed back into a younger body in a Monday. On page 3, a sentence with teeth. Unlisted driver at time of loss may affect coverage. The police incident number was there too, neat and official, and a note: other party reports your vehicle left the scene. I thought about the sticker on the plate already out of date, the tow lot, the stew of small failures that add up to a ledger. I thought about forgiveness and its meaner cousin, enabling. I pulled open the junk drawer where everyone keeps the things that are only useful in emergencies: rubber bands, batteries, and the yellow flyer from the diner bulletin board. Free legal clinic, Thursdays. Walk-ins welcome. Someone had drawn a smiley face in the O of clinic. As if law could be made kind with a pen. I set the flyer on top of the brown folder and smoothed it flat. I would bring the claim, the policy, the salvage note, and the story told without embroidery. I would bring my name, since they had already used it. I breathed in, slow and measured. The way nurses teach you when they want you to believe in your lungs again. In the morning, I would go where truth is sorted from panic, and ink is asked to explain itself. The impound lot sits behind a chain, link fence topped with barbed wire that looks ceremonial, until you imagine the ways people try to argue with steel. A misty rain stitched the air, the kind that doesn't feel like weather until your cuffs are damp. The office was a prefab trailer with a bell that cried out every time the door opened and closed. Inside, fluorescent lighting, a jar of pens no one wanted to steal, and the layered smell of old oil, wet cardboard, and something sweet from a vending machine that gave up in 2012. Last name? The clerk asked, already typing. He had the manner of someone who has seen every version of regret. I slid my license across and said my son's name out loud anyway, as if that might redirect the gravity. The clerk glanced at his screen, then at me. Registered to you. He printed out a stack that arrived warm, like laundry pulled before it's dry. Tow ticket, storage fees, and the condition report from intake. You'll need a release signature here. If insurance is involved, call them first. There's a note. A note. I have learned to fear what paper calls a note. On the second page, under a box labeled Remarks, someone had written in blunt, mechanic handwriting, unlisted driver at time of loss. Coverage may be denied. The letters leaned slightly forward, impatient. Time of loss, there it was, the phrase that turns a Tuesday into a timeline. My mouth went dry. I could picture her hands on the wheel, shaking. I could hear the way fear makes you tidy your story before you tell it. Can I see the car? I asked. I won't touch anything. He buzzed a gate. Rows of vehicles sat like hulks on a beach after the tide forgot them. The sedan looked smaller here, as if shame were a kind of shrink wrap. The tow yard light made every scratch honest. The front bumper had a smear of red you wouldn't notice, unless you were looking for it. And I was looking for it. Through the windshield, I found the VN on the dash and the manufacturer's sticker on the door jamb, numbers that don't blink when people lie. My phone buzzed with a new message. We're on our way, she'd written. Sorry about the hour last night. I pocketed it without answering. They came 10 minutes later. Hair damp with drizzle, his jaw set in that way men hold it when they want to look useful. She hugged herself, made smaller. I meant to add him, she said. Staring at the pavement. I did. I was going to call the agent last week. But then work and the baby had a fever and I forgot. Each clause was a stepping stone across a river she'd chosen not to ford. This line, I said, tapping the remark with my nail, isn't a river. It's a door. And it's locked when you forget. She nodded, eyes glassing. My son said he'd cover the fees. But his voice didn't quite reach the parts of me that needed it. The clerk came by with a clipboard, pointed to where ink should go, explained the daily storage rate as if reciting multiplication tables. You can take it today if you've got proof of current registration and insurance, he said. We had neither. The car would stay. I put on my reading glasses and did the only thing I could do that felt like control. I photographed everything. The bumper, the taillight, the smear of red, the tow ticket with its timestamp, the intake sheet with the impatient handwriting, the license plate and the expired sticker, the vine on the dash, the VN on the door, the odometer reading through the dusty lens of the cluster. I took pictures of the flyer for release procedures and the posted notice about after hours fees. Each image went into a folder on my phone labeled with the date and the word evidence, because sometimes the only prayer you get is the one you make with documentation. Back in the trailer, I asked for copies of the condition report and receipt, then photographed those, too. The clerk didn't roll his eyes. Maybe he had a mother. Maybe he just understood that paper is the only language some systems agree to answer. Outside, the drizzle thickened. I tucked the warm pages into my brown folder and pressed the flap flat. We couldn't take the car, not yet. But the story of the car, every number, every line where a name should have been and wasn't, that came home with me. We ate at the kitchen table because pretending this was casual always seemed to make hard things easier to say. The casserole was still warm, the vinaigrette separating in its jar. The evening news murmuring about weather 2 states away. My daughter-in-law set down her fork and said it like an observation about the sky. Mom has the cleanest credit in the house. She smiled at me the way you smile at a bank teller, pleasant, with a purpose behind it. My son didn't look up. He ran his thumb along the condensation of his water glass, drawing a clear line through the fog. She went on, effortless. So here's what I'm thinking. We keep everything as is for, 6 months. Just to keep it smooth. Rates stay low, registration doesn't get flagged, no more surprises. After that, we switch it back, easy. 6 months is what people say when they mean long enough for you to forget who promised what. The number landed in my chest like a small stone. "And what changes in 6 months?" I asked, not unkindly. She blinked, as if the question were a trick. "Things settle. We're just in a rough patch." A shrug that tried to be light and failed. "There are old things." She picked at the corner of a napkin. "Tickets from before the baby. Court fees that got rolled into other fees. My license is fine now, but there are reinstatement costs. And if the registration or the insurance is under my name, all that shows up again. The monthly goes up and..." She spread her hands, palms empty. "It's not fair." There it was, the word that tries to dress neat as principle. Not fair that the past keeps a ledger. Not fair that insurers use credit like a crystal ball. Not fair that a system will marry your name to your worst day, and then bill your best days for it. I thought about the way she'd said mom instead of my name, as if motherhood included a line of credit you never reached the limit on. My son finally spoke. "It's temporary." The tone he used in middle school when he asked to borrow the truck for a weekend and returned it with the tank on E. "We just need to get through this window." "Window's open," I said. "They also close." I stood to clear the plates because sometimes moving small things makes the big thing stand still long enough for you to see it. The brown folder was already on the counter, its edges softened from being held too often. I set it on the table between us and opened it like a map. "Do you know what my name buys you?" I asked, tapping the declarations page. "A rate based on my years of paying on time. A registration that doesn't trip a wire. A presumption of reliability. It also buys me liability. It buys me letters when you forget to open yours. It buys me fees for a car I don't drive and a story I didn't write." She flushed. "I was going to add him," she said, glancing at my son. "I meant to. I just forgot." I finished for her, gently because accuracy isn't the same as cruelty. The house felt very quiet. Even the refrigerator respected the moment. I thought of that midnight claim, the impound, the anxious handwriting, unlisted driver at time of loss. How many little choices had led us here? Pebbles rolling until they became a slide. "No," I said, and felt the word settle into the room like a piece of furniture we should have bought years ago. "We're not keeping anything Oz is for 6 months. We're undoing what should never have been done. Starting now." My son opened his mouth and closed it again. She looked at him as if he might pull a solution out of his pocket with the car keys. When he didn't, she folded her napkin into a tight square and set it carefully by her plate. A small ceremony of surrender, or maybe of storing something for later. I reached for the little spiral notebook I keep for lists that matter. The paper was rough. The way I prefer it, ink bites down and stays. I wrote the date and then, in tidy block letters, revoke power of attorneys all forms. Revoke any standing authorizations, DMVG Insurer Bank. Under that freeze credit, update mailing preferences to me only. Written communications only, no recorded statements. Each line was a rung on a ladder out of a hole I had stepped into with both feet. "I'll call the insurer in the morning," I said. "I'll call the DMV. I'll draft the letters." I closed the folder and rested my hand on the cardboard. "You will call the court and make arrangements for what you owe. You will drive a car that is yours to drive, insured in your name at a rate that reflects your choices. That's not punishment. That's adulthood." No one argued. The news kept talking about weather far away. It was raining there, maybe. Here, it was just the sound of 3 people learning the new shape of a table. I cleared the plates, set the notebook by the coffee maker, and underlined the last line once more. Boundaries are not walls, they're doors with locks. Tonight, I finally turned one. The courthouse hallway was cold and bright in a way that made everything feel disinfected. Hope, anger, even the fingerprints on the glass. It smelled like toner and old envelopes, a scent that had followed me from waiting rooms my whole life. People arranged themselves on the benches like misplaced files. A teenager with a skateboard tucked under his knees, a woman in scrubs reading a citation as if it were a lab result, a man whispering to his lawyer with the urgency of a prayer. I signed in at the clerk's window and sat with my brown folder on my lap, a talisman made of paper. A woman from legal aid found me by name. Navy suit, low heels. A binder that looked heavier than she did. "Answer only what you're asked," she said, voice soft but edged. "Don't guess. Don't fill silence to be polite. You weren't the driver, say that and stop. If they ask who was, you're under no obligation to speculate." "I'm the owner," I said. As if that explained why my heart kept double-stepping. "It makes you visible," she said, "not responsible for things you didn't do." When we were called, the courtroom was a rectangle of wood and procedure. The judge wore his wariness like a second robe. He moved the calendar along with a rhythm that reminded me of metronomes. Click, click. Next, when our matter was called, my name sounded larger than I felt. "Who is the registered owner of the vehicle ending in 492? He asked. "I am, Your Honor," I said, standing. Every head turned, as if the word owner meant parent. He looked over his glasses. "Were you driving on the date in question?" "No, Your Honor." There was a small murmur, the room's appetite for a twist. The city attorney, square jaw, tie the color of new bruises, stood and announced he had submitted an exhibit. The bailiff handed up a glossy still from a traffic camera, the kind that turns people into shapes with evidence around the edges. The driver's face was in shadow from a cap. The chin could have been anyone's and therefore everyone's. It wasn't me. I knew the planes of my son's face the way I know the angles of a teacup. This wasn't clear enough to convict or absolve. The attorney clicked his pen like a trigger. "Your Honor, while the owner is present, the evidence suggests an unlisted driver operated the vehicle, which bears on both the registration citation and any insurance determinations." The judge studied the photo, then me. "If you were not driving, who was?" I felt the courtroom lean, as if gravity had shifted to the small space between my mouth and my next word. I thought about midnight, and the claim email that called me named like a title I hadn't sought. I thought about the impound clerk's handwriting. Unlisted driver at time of loss. Letters that didn't care about families. And I thought about how quickly a helpful guess becomes a statement, and a statement becomes a record, and a record becomes a truth you never intended to swear to. "I cannot say with certainty, Your Honor," I answered. The lawyer from legal aid didn't touch me, but I felt her approval like the warmth of a hand near, not on. The judge nodded once, not unkind. "Very well. As to the registration, the court notes it was expired on the date in question. Owner. You are responsible for ensuring the vehicle you own is properly registered. As to the driver's identity, the evidence is inconclusive. The citation on registration stands. Fees may be addressed at DMV upon proof of renewal. Any hit-and-run allegation, if pursued, will be handled separately." He tapped the file closed, a small coffin of paper. When we stepped back into the hallway, the legal aid attorney exhaled first. "You did exactly right," she said. "One careless word, and they would carve it into stone." I sat on the bench and let my spine meet the cool wood. The building hummed with fluorescent light and other people's stories. In the folder, the camera still lay on top. The silhouette of a driver who was not me and not clearly my son, a Rorschach for consequences. I slid it behind the declarations page. Then the tow receipt, then the salvage note, as if order could keep me from being devoured by a system that prefers categories to people. Outside, noon had arrived without fanfare. I stepped into it with my folder and a list forming in my mind: renew, request records, demand everything in writing. I understood, finally and fully, how a single sentence can tilt a life, so I chose mine precisely, and I kept the rest unwritten. "Recorded line, okay?" The adjuster chirped, as if we were deciding between paper or plastic. I could hear office life in the background. Someone laughing too loudly. A printer coughing out confetti of other people's bad days. My coffee sat untouched. The brown folder was open in front of me like a hymn book. "No," I said, "and let the word take up its full size. We'll correspond by email. Please send me the declarations page, the application is submitted, all endorsements, any reservation of rights letter, your claim log to date, and the other party's report. I'll respond in writing." A pause. I pictured her with a headset and a script, searching for the line that covered women my age who sounded like they owned a stapler and a spine. "Mom, recorded statements help us resolve claims efficiently." "Efficiency is not my religion," I said. "Accuracy is. Email, please." Her vowels deflated. "One moment while I check with my supervisor." I set the phone on speaker and listened to hold music try to clean the air. At the window, the neighbor's maple shook its new leaves like a dog after a bath. I picked up my pen and wrote the time and her name at the top of a yellow pad. When she came back, her voice had been ironed. "We can proceed via email." The packet arrived in my inbox 10 minutes later, wearing a polite subject line. I printed everything. Warm pages pooled on the table. Policy declarations, application responses with boxes checked in a font that pretends to be neutral, endorsements that read like fine print riddles. Under drivers, I saw what I already knew: my name, my son listed, my daughter, in-law absent. Under use, the fiction of my commute lived on like an urban legend. The claim log, redacted here and there, showed timestamps, outreach attempts, and a note that tasted like pennies. EUCRS pending if recorded statement refused. Examination under oath. Reservation of rights. The alphabet armor companies wear when they mean to scare you into being easier. I drafted my response slowly, like stitching a hem. Thank you for the documents. Confirming I will not give a recorded statement. Confirming all future communications will be in writing. Attached police incident number, photographs of the vehicle, proof of the impound remark, unlisted driver at time of loss. Please also confirm whether you require a non-owner affidavit to evaluate coverage with respect to the named insured. Her reply came back faster than I expected, as if the word affidavit had pressed a buzzer. Yes, a non-owner affidavit may help clarify your exposure and separate liability if you were not operating or benefiting from the vehicle's use. We can provide a template. Note that misstatements are material. I read that twice. May help is not a promise. And material is the word they use when an error becomes a sin. The phone rang again. Just so you know, she said, too bright. If we don't have the facts we need, we may issue a reservation of rights letter while we investigate. I assumed you would, I said. Please include your questions in writing. I'll answer what I know and nothing I don't. Behind her script, I heard human curiosity. Most people just talk. Most people think talking is harmless. I said. It isn't. When the call ended, I put the affidavit template on top of the pile. It wanted me to swear I didn't use the car for errands, appointments, or favors, that I didn't receive a benefit from its use. The truth was that benefit is a slippery thing. Peace in a house where young parents aren't panicked counts as benefit, too. I would not let a form turn care into perjury. I took out my little spiral notebook and added a page questions for clinic. Does a non-owner affidavit protect me if policy carries misrepresentations? What proof do I need? Texts, gas receipts, the midnight timeline. What happens if the company insists on an EU? Can they cancel for misrepresentation even if I correct it in writing now? The yellow flyer from the diner sat where I'd left it, with its earnest smiley face in the O. Free legal clinic, Thursday, walk-ins welcome. I called the number and asked if someone could review an affidavit and a policy file. Bring everything, the voice said. We like paper. I have paper. I answered and looked at my hands, inked with times and names. I stacked the documents: claim log, declarations, endorsements, template, police note. I slid them into the brown folder and smoothed the flap flat, the way you calm a restless page. I didn't say a prayer. I made an appointment. Tomorrow I would carry the whole story in, not to be charming, not to confess, but to be precise, so that the next word I signed would be a door I meant to open. The diner had the kind of light that makes everything honest. No shadows to hide in, just chrome and glass and the hum of a soft old jukebox. I poured coffee from the carafe the waitress left, watched the ribbon of dark fold into the cup. My son slid into the booth across from me and stared at the paper, wrapped straw like it might give him a script. He didn't meet my eyes. Outside, a semi rolled past and shook the window a little, as if the town itself were clearing its throat. I ordered you the meatloaf, I said. You used to like it. I still do, he answered, voice careful, like he was walking barefoot over gravel. The waitress, a woman whose name tag had been polished down to a smudge, refilled our waters and disappeared. I reached into my bag and brought out the brown folder. The flap is soft now from use. It opens like a well-read book. I laid the documents down one by one, the title with my name, planted where the ink is difficult to argue with. The policy declarations, the ticket and the tow receipt, the intake sheet with the impatient handwriting. Unlisted driver at time of loss. I didn't say anything. The papers said enough with their neat fonts and their inability to lie for us. He watched my hands. The way his face moved reminded me of the baby he'd been. The same stubborn chin, the same eyes complicated by kindness and fear. I'm sorry about all this, he said. I didn't mean for it to pile up. Things don't pile up by themselves, I said, not unkindly. I tapped the corner of the title. Tell me how we got here. He rubbed at the condensation on his glass until a clear circle appeared on the red plastic. It was supposed to be simple. He began, which is what people say 20 minutes before the tow truck arrives. A buddy of mine works with a guy who flips cars. They got this one cheap. The title was. He searched for a word, found one that didn't cut quite enough. Messy. He said he could clean it up faster if we didn't run it through the usual steps. Just sign where he said. He'd jump it to us and we'd save on taxes and time. He swallowed. It's called skipping. Title skipping. Sometimes they do it. He said it's fine. The meatloaf came. The waitress slid plates in front of us and retreated, the smell of onions following her. My son's fork stayed still. The word skipping hung between us, innocent as a playground game and not at all innocent. You knew it wasn't fine, I said softly. Not in your bones. That's why you didn't show me the receipt until it fell out. That's why we're in a booth instead of at my kitchen table. He nodded. So small a gesture it might have been a tremor. I thought I was getting ahead. Every time I try to do right by this family, Mom, I feel like I'm breaking some rule I didn't know existed. There are rules you don't know, I said, and there are rules you pretend not to know. I lifted the declaration page, putting me as the primary driver on a car. I don't drive as one of them. He winced at that. Outside, the neon open sign ghosted our reflection onto the glass. We looked like a mother and a son any night of the world, trying to choose the sentence that would not ruin the next year. I'm meeting with the legal clinic, I said. They think a non-owner affidavit may help. I'm revoking any authorizations, changing everything to writing. I will correct what I signed too quickly. That is my part. He finally looked up. The boy in him waited for rescue. The man in him begged not to need it. And your part? I said slow enough that each word had to earn its place. Is to call the court about the old fines. You will speak to the DMV about the title. How it moved from hand to hand like a hot potato. You will tell the truth even if it costs you. I will fix the mistake that belongs to me. But you will face the mistake that belongs to you. He nodded, the movement heavier this time, like something shifted into the right slot. He lifted his fork, tasted the meatloaf, set it down again. I poured more coffee. It wasn't sweet, but it was hot. We sat there with our plates and our consequences, and for the first time in weeks I felt the booth steady under us, as if the floor had decided not to move. The lawyer's office was the size of a good pantry. 2 chairs, 1 desk with a shoulder of stacked files, and a steel cabinet that remembered every decade since the 70s. The fluorescent light hummed like it had opinions. On the wall, a diploma leaned in its frame as if it were tired of standing up straight. She, first name Ruth, last name with an extra consonant you could trip on, offered me tea from a chipped mug and slid a legal pad across the desk. Tell me the story and the order paper would tell it, she said, dates, names, documents. So I did. The DMV envelope, the title with my signature where convenience pretends to be love. The expired sticker, the tow, the claim at 2:07 a.m., the impatient scrawl. Unlisted driver at time of loss. Ruth wrote quickly, the nib whispering. When I finished, she tapped the pen once against the pad, a gavel in miniature. First, she said, we draw a line. She opened a fresh document on her computer. The cursor blinked like a metronome. Revocation letter. You are withdrawing any prior authorizations, verbal or written, for the agent, the insurer, the dealership, anyone who has been speaking in your name. No recorded statements. Written communications only. She typed with the steady speed of someone who has untied a lot of knots. And the car. We'll file a notice of transfer and release of liability with DMV, she said. Even if the car is physically elsewhere, you put the state on notice. From this date forward, you are not operating or controlling that vehicle. It doesn't fix the past, but it stops the bleeding. She printed the letter. The paper came out warm and certain. My name looked like it had found its backbone again. Now for the part that likes to hide. She swiveled to the steel cabinet, tugged out a thin folder, then turned back to her screen and ran a search on the title chain. Her mouth flattened. There's a lion here? She said. Not the bank kind. A repair lien, garage keeper, most likely. Someone did work and wasn't paid. They perfected the lion, and once perfected, it sticks to the vehicle, not the person. She looked at me. That means a creditor can seize the car regardless of whose name the current title shows. If the impound releases it, the lion holder could still claim it. I felt that sentence land, heavy and accurate. My son's bright shortcut had looped around to bite any hand within reach. Can they come to my driveway? I asked, already picturing a flabid like a shark fin at the curb. Sometimes, she said. Depends on notice and state rules. But the point is the debt travels with the metal. We can request the lien paperwork, challenge service if it's sloppy, negotiate a payoff if it exists at all. But until it's cleared, this car is a lawsuit on wheels. She drafted a second letter requesting lien documentation and a third to the impound, instructing them not to release the vehicle without written notice to me and to counsel. Then she turned the monitor so I could read a form with my name already filled in. Limited power of attorney, she said. Very limited. It lets me request records, sign DMV forms related to release of liability, and correspond with the insurer on your behalf. It does not let me buy, sell, authorize repairs, or do anything with your bank accounts. Scope and dates right here. She underlined the paragraph with her finger. I read every line. The language was dry and careful, the way bridges ought to be built. I signed, the pen steady for once, and asked for 2 hard copies. She handed them over in a manila envelope, but I slipped them into my brown folder instead. Cardboard and ink, the armor I can lift. At the door, Ruth pressed the revocation letter into my hand. Mail this certified, keep the receipt, then breathe. Her smile was thin but real. You didn't cause every bend in this road. Today you straightened your lane. Outside, the wind smelled like rain and hot pavement. I set the folder on the passenger seat, palm flat on its spine, and felt the relief of a drawn boundary, sharp, legible mine. The screws resisted, as if even the car didn't want to let go of me. I crouched in the driveway with a rusted screwdriver, my cardigan sleeves pushed up, prying loose the plate that had carried my name further than I ever intended. Each turn squealed, a sound both small and final. When the metal finally dropped into my hands, it was heavier than I remembered. The weight of years and liability pressed into 12 inches of tin. I set the plate into a paper bag like it was a loaf of bread gone stale. My chest felt just as hollow. At the DMV, the air smelled of tonner sweat and the nervous patience of people who had brought too few documents. A neon sign flashed now serving G23, and I clutched my brown folder tighter, waiting for my number to appear. Around me, toddlers pressed sticky palms against plexiglass dividers. A man rehearsed his eye chart under his breath. When my turn came, I carried the plates, the affidavit, and my release form to the counter, as if I were offering confession. The clerk was younger than my son, his hair carefully slicked, his tie clip shaped like a tiny steering wheel. Transaction, he asked, not looking up. I laid out the evidence. Plates, release of liability, the affidavit declaring I was not and had never been the driver of record. The forms spread across the counter like tarot cards, telling a story he didn't need to embellish. He scanned the screws argued with me, as if even the car didn't want to release what tied us together. The impound had let me remove the plates the day before. One small mercy. So I crouched in the driveway with a worn screwdriver and eased each rusted cross into motion. The metal groaned and then gave. When the plate slid into my hands, it felt heavier than tin should, a condensed weight of errands I never ran and promises I never made. I slipped both plates into a grocery bag the color of old bread and stood there for a moment, palms tingling, like I'd just lifted something living. The DMV smelled the way bureaucracy always does: toner and damp wool, old coffee and patience. A red marquee announced numbers climbing with geological speed. I held my brown folder like a passport and rehearsed the order of events under my breath: surrender plates, file the release of liability, hand over the notarized non-owner affidavit for my records and the insurers. When G42 blinked on, I stepped to the counter. Transaction, the clerk asked without looking up. He was younger than my son, tie clip shaped like a tiny steering wheel, a face that had not yet learned to expect the worst. Surrender plates and release of liability, I said, laying the metal down with a care I usually reserve for crystal. I slid the forms over. The revocation letter Ruth had drafted, the DMV release, a copy of the affidavit, where I swore I wasn't the one driving or benefiting from the use of the car. He scanned the barcodes, fingers quick and bored. The system blinked back at him. He frowned, finally meeting my eyes. Huh? I have learned there are only 2 honest sounds in an office: huh and oh. One means surprise. The other means trouble has found its coat. What does "hop" mean? I asked. He swiveled the screen slightly, then remembered he wasn't supposed to and swiveled it back. Your insurance verification is flagged. He tapped a line of text with his pen cap. The carrier's database is showing a possible fraudulent misrepresentation on the policy tied to this VIN. That can affect registration status and fees retroactively if they rescind coverage. I'm not saying they did. I'm saying the system wants me to tell you they might. Fraudulent. The word sat between us like a cracked plate someone had tried to pass as whole. I thought of the boxes checked for me, the imaginary commute, the tidy fiction of miles, and of the midnight claim that named me like a crown I hadn't asked to wear. What does that change for today? I asked, keeping my voice flat enough to rest a level on. For today, he said, I can process surrender of plates and accept your release of liability. That puts a date in the state's books that you're no longer the responsible party for this vehicle. He slid a stamped receipt across the counter. But if the insurer rescinds, DMV may assess back fees or penalties related to lapsed coverage. They'll mail notices. He offered a sympathetic wince. Paper fines you. I know, I said, and I did. He took the plates, fed them through a slot that swallowed them with a shy clank, and stamped my forms with a noise that sounded almost like approval. At a side table, I made a neat stack stamped receipt, copy of the release, copy of the affidavit. I clipped them to Ruth's letter and wrote today's date in red at the top, then tucked everything into the brown folder. My hands shook a little when I capped the pen. It wasn't fear so much as the tiredness you feel after you've held a door closed against weather. Outside, the parking lot glittered with a recent spit of rain. I sat in the car with the folder on my lap and typed a message, slow enough that each word had to pass customs before it crossed the border of my mouth. From now on, there is no version of your car with my name on it. I've surrendered the plates and filed the release. The insurer may review for misrepresentation. You will deal with them directly. I love you. This is a boundary, not a goodbye. I hit send and watched the bubbles take the message away. Somewhere behind the DMV facade, a shredder hummed, chewing up plates I'd once mistaken for belonging. I pressed my palm to the folder and felt its quiet thrum, the pulse of paper doing what it can. Then I put the car in gear and drove home, lighter by 2 rectangles of metal and one unspoken burden I should have put down years ago. She said it the way someone names a traffic sign flat, red, and meant to stop me. You're an obstacle. The word landed on the table between the salt shaker and the baby's missing sock. My daughter-in-law didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. My son stood behind her with a box in his arms and stared at the window like the glass might volunteer to be a shield. The house felt smaller than it had in years, the rooms filling with cardboard and air that had been breathed too many times. I won't apologize for putting my name back where it belongs, I said. The sentence tasted like metal but went down clean. He shifted the box to the other hip. He didn't contradict her. Silence is a kind of agreement, and in families it is often the loudest kind. They moved in loops all afternoon to the car, back inside, to the trunk, back to the bedroom. The baby's laugh rang once and then not again. When the door finally closed for the last time, the house exhaled, and the quiet that came after wasn't peaceful, just wide. In their room, the indentations of furniture were still pressed into the carpet like pale ghosts. On the dresser, they left what people leave when they have learned to sprint. Crumbs of consequence. A fan of envelopes, some with windows, some scarred with stamps that looked like bruises. Phenol nos in block letters that never learned to whisper. Toll by plate statements. A ticket pink as a rash. Court dates circled and then abandoned. I sat on the edge of the bed and sorted. The pile made a story, even if no one wanted to read it. Late fees breeding more fees. Small failures multiplied into a theory of the world. Under the stack, caught in the corner like a frightened animal, was a thick envelope addressed to me at my own house. My name, my street, my ZIP, and a return address I knew too well, the insurance company's P.O. box. It was unopened. The flap still wore its factory gum. The paper had that stiff, dignified feel mail gets when it wants to be taken seriously. I held it up to the light, saw the watermark of a logo, and felt the small, ridiculous superstition that maybe if I didn't open it, the words inside wouldn't exist. Then I tore it cleanly and slid a fingernail under the crease. Niso of cancellation, betrayal ma crossentioen. Effective date 2 months ago. Policy number mine. The letter was polite in the way a guillotine is efficient. They had reviewed the application. The facts did not match the use. Coverage had been rescinded back to the date when truth and convenience parted ways. There was a line about appeal rights and another about the right to obtain coverage elsewhere. The important part was not in bold. The night of the bump at the unfriendly intersection, there had been no coverage to speak of. A policy can be a ghost that looks like a person until you need it to lift something. I sat very still, the letter open in my lap like a verdict. Anger came first, a hot animal. Grief followed, embarrassed to be seen. Then something quieter. The relief of finally knowing what was true. In the kitchen, I pulled down the hard brown folder. I've started to call my courthouse file. I slid the cancellation in behind the DMV receipts, the release of liability, the affidavit that had made me honest on paper, even when my family preferred a prettier story. I wrote the date on a sticky note and pressed it to the top page. My heart knocked once, hard enough to be counted. My hands did not shake. I texted my son a sentence that did only what sentences can do: carry a boundary across a distance. I will fix what belongs to me. You will call the court about the tickets and the insurer about their decision. From this day, there is no car with my name on it. I love you. Choose the next right thing. Then I set the phone face down and made tea in the quiet house, letting the water come to a boil on its own time. The insurance building looked like it had been designed to keep feelings outside. Glass, brushed steel, a fern that never wilted because it was made not to. We checked in at a tablet that asked for our names, as if they were data points rather than stories. A receptionist with perfect hair led us to a small conference room where the walls were a gray that didn't take sides. The adjuster, Miss Perez, according to her badge, set a legal pad down in front of her, clicked a pen, and offered water none of us touched. Before we begin, she said, I want to note that this is not a recorded statement. We'll capture the substance of the conversation in writing and send it to you to confirm. She looked at me when she said confirm, and I inclined my head. Boundaries can make a room safer, even when the floor is corporate carpet. She reviewed what their file said: the policy in my name, later canceled for misrepresentation. The incident number, the tow, the impound notation about an unlisted driver. Then the question that had been sitting quietly between us since the door clicked shut. Who was operating the vehicle that night? My daughter-in-law went first, words in a circle like birds that refused to land. It was chaotic, she said. The streetlights were out. We didn't think anyone was hurt. I was scared. It's been a lot. She reached for my son's arm but didn't quite touch it. We were just trying to get home. Ms. Perez did not blink. Who was driving? I was, my son said. And the sentence fell into the room with the thud of something heavy finally set down. His voice was steady in the way that happens after a person stops choosing between two bad options. A friend at the bar couldn't stand up straight. I took his keys. On the way back, we tapped the bumper of a car at the light. Nothing dramatic, a scuff. I pulled over on a side street. I should have stayed. I should have called. I didn't. I drove off. There are moments a mother learns new grammar: pride and disappointment as a compound noun, apology and consequence in the same tense. I kept my eyes on his face and not on the legal pad, catching his words. Ms. Perez wrote in block letters, a careful transcript of a life. Thank you, she said. For the record, you are listed as a driver on the application, but not designated as primary. Your spouse is not listed. The policy has been rescinded effective 2 months before the date of loss for material misrepresentation. She tapped the page twice with the pen's cap. That means there may be no coverage available under this contract for the incident you've described. I'm not the final decision maker on that, but it's where the analysis is heading. My daughter-in-law's hand dropped to her lap. With thought, she began, and then she stopped. All the sentences that start with "we thought" go to the same place, and none of them help. If the company needs an examination under oath, Ms. Perez continued, well, send a written request with specific questions. If a non-owner affidavit from you, she nodded toward me, hasn't already been submitted, I'd recommend you complete it. Her gaze softened by a degree. It can help separate your exposure from theirs. I said, put it all in writing. I'll answer only what I know, so will he. My son nodded, and I felt a small, necessary click, like a latch finding its strike plate. We left with nothing that looked like good news, just a promise of letters and a draft of our own admission. In the elevator, my daughter-in-law stared at the numbers as they counted down. This ruins everything, she whispered, but it sounded less like anger than math. Outside, the air tasted like rain. We stood on the sidewalk, a family that had traded the convenience of a lie for the long work of truth. My son put his hands in his pockets and looked at me, boy and man both visible. "I'm sorry," he said. I should have said it sooner. Sooner is always better. I answered, and then I touched his sleeve so the words wouldn't feel like a verdict. But late truth beats a long lie. The offer arrived as an email with no adjectives, just numbers and conditions. The other driver's attorney would accept a small settlement for the bumper and paint if we cooperated. Statements in writing, no runaround, payment within 60 days. It wasn't mercy, it was math. Ruth called me before I could call her. "This is not the kind of check that buys peace," she said. "It buys an ending you can live with." We met in her narrow office again. She had already marked the margins of the proposal with a pencil, each note a stitch pulling the hem straight. My son sat beside me, hands folded, the way he used to sit in church when he knew the sermon was aimed directly at him. "We'll counter," Ruth said, on 2 points. First, your mother is not paying a dime for conduct she didn't commit. Second, any agreement must carve her out on paper. No responsibility as driver, no admission of fault. She dialed and put the call on speaker. The other side's lawyer sounded like late afternoon. Tired, practiced, almost kind. Back and forth they went, clauses traded like polite threats. "We'll accept a signed narrative from the son," Ruth said, on a non-owner affidavit from the mother. "We want a release of claims against her, personal and otherwise." A pause. "And no recorded statements. Questions in writing only." "Fine," the voice said, and the tone suggested he had a stack of similar files waiting. "But we'll need proof of financial responsibility going forward. If the state requires SR-22, he files it. If not, we want a certification that he's insured under his own policy." Ruth looked at my son. "It's a form, not a scarlet letter," she said. "It sits on file for a while to prove you can carry coverage. If you want the adult life you say you want, this is part of it." There was one more condition, delivered without drama. "We will not close this with the mother listed anywhere on title or policy," the attorney said. "No named insured, no registered owner, no hidden authorizations. Clean break." I felt that last phrase ring through me like a steadying note. Ruth didn't blink. She surrendered the plates and filed release with the DMV. She said, "We'll append the stamped receipt to the agreement. Her revocation letters are already on record." The draft settlement came by courier the next morning. Thin pages held together with a brass fastener, cool in my hands. Ruth ran a finger under each paragraph as she read aloud the parts that mattered: no admission of liability, limited settlement for property damage only, a mutual release naming me explicitly as not responsible for operation of the vehicle, the son's promise to maintain insurance and file SR-22 if required. The insurer's rescission acknowledged as separate and not an admission by any party. Jurisdictional boilerplate that made the paper feel official. 2 signatures. Ruth said, sliding the pen across the desk. "Yours here as a party only to the extent the other side releases you, his there, as the one accepting terms and obligations." My son took the pen first. He didn't shake. He wrote his name in the same hand he'd used on spelling tests and birthday cards, and then he set the pen down with a care I hadn't seen in months. When it was my turn, I thought of all the other lines I had crossed in ink: the title, the affidavit, the revocation. This one felt different, not a trap disguised as trust, but a line drawn firmly where my life ended and his began. I signed. Ruth stamped. Somewhere a copier woke and made it real. Outside, the day had shed its gray. The sky over the parking lot was the washed blue of a shirt dried on a line, unwrinkled and honest. My son stood beside me, papers tucked under his arm, shoulders squared as if measuring a new weight he was finally meant to carry. "Thank you," he said. "Carry it well," I answered, as we walked to our cars, separate, finally, the way names on documents now were. I closed my eyes for a beat and let the light find my face. It wasn't forgiveness and it wasn't victory. It was something simpler: air moving, a horizon clear enough to see. I bought the truck on a Tuesday because Tuesdays feel like honest days. No weekend shine, no Monday excuses. The seller was a retired landscaper with hands the color of soil and a laugh that said he trusted people who carried tape measures. The pickup was 10 years old. Paint sun, faded at the hood, a dent along the back bumper that looked like a dimple. He laid out the maintenance records in a neat fan on the tailgate: oil changes, brake pads, a note about replacing the serpentine belt last spring. The odometer read 128,406, which is either a warning or a promise depending on how you live. We did the paperwork at his kitchen table, not in a fluorescent office. I read every line: seller, buyer, purchase price spelled out in words and numbers. The as-is clause boxed like a boundary. When it came to owner, I wrote my name the way you anchor a tent. Sturdy, twice checked. I opened my own policy online while he rinsed coffee mugs, answered every question as if it were a vow: primary driver. Yes, commute, no, miles per year, modest, please. Other household drivers, none. I printed the ID cards at the library on the way home, warm from the copier. Slipped them behind the visor where the sun wouldn't bleach them into ghosts. The truck smelled like clean dust and pine from an old air freshener. The bench seat fit my hips like a fact. The radio found a station that played songs from the years when everything was simple and nothing was. I turned it down to a hum so I could listen to the engine think. The first place I went wasn't the grocery or the bank. I pointed the hood toward the lake. The road there still remembers my husband's tires. Long afternoons when we brought folding chairs and a thermos and took turns pretending we liked fishing. Wind stitched through the open windows, tugging at the cuffs of his cardigan on my arms. The lake was its usual, practical blue, the kind of color you trust. I parked beneath a cottonwood and killed the engine. Silence has a shape when it arrives in a place that knows your name. I sat with my hands on the wheel a few extra breaths, then let them fall to my lap. The old arguments, about how much I can carry, who I am obligated to rescue, had gone quiet with the key. I thought about plates surrendered, letters mailed certified, the sharp click of a pen on a settlement. A person can build a new room in her life with paperwork and stubbornness. I slipped off the cardigan and folded it beside me, careful with the elbows where grief had worn the yarn thin. The phone rang. My son's name, uncomplicated on the screen. "Can we meet?" he asked. He sounded older in a way that wasn't about years, just us. Not her. For a second I watched the lake accept a breeze, ripples moving out in tidy rings, each touching the next without needing to swallow it. "Where?" I said. "The diner," he said. "If you can." I looked at the mirror and saw only myself, a woman with wind-stung cheeks, a truck key on a ring she didn't have to hand back. "I can." On the way out, the gravel popped under the tires like punctuation. I signaled even though no one was behind me. Habit as prayer. At the intersection, the light turned green over a street that has been both a promise and a problem. I flicked the blinker left and watched the arrow pulse on the dashboard, small and insistent. The old neon sign of the diner would be warm by the time I arrived, coffee the color of new decisions, a booth that had seen worse and better. I checked my mirrors, eased onto the road, and let the turn signal click us toward it, steady as a heartbeat. The neon pen sign threw pink geometry across the tabletop, slicing through the laminate and settling on the closed brown folder between us. The waitress had stopped asking if we wanted pie. It was just the two of us now, no stroller. No flurry of explanations. Our reflections faint in the window, a mother and a son deciding whether to keep telling the same story. He touched the edge of the folder, then pulled his hand back like the cardboard was hot. "I'm sorry," he said, words that arrived without lace. "For the shortcut. For the lies that were really just silence. For making you carry what wasn't yours." He lifted his eyes to mine. "I want to start over, and I'll do it the right way. I'll handle the court dates, the DMV. If they make me file SR-22, I'll file it. My policy, my premiums. My fault." The jukebox in the corner coughed up a song from the year he learned to ride a bike. The diner smelled like coffee and bleach, comfort and consequence. I let the apology hold the space it deserved. Then I slid the folder aside and brought out a single sheet I drafted at the library, the language borrowed from Ruth and cleaned of anything sentimental. "It isn't a contract for love," I said, placing it between us. "It's a loan agreement. Lang from church leaves for Arizona tomorrow. She asked me to keep an eye on her old Corolla while she's gone. It's in my driveway for a week. If you need wheels while you straighten the title mess, you can use it under these terms." I tapped the page. "You show proof of your own insurance. Non-owner coverage at minimum. Before I give you a key, you're the only driver. No late night favors. You text me a photo of the odometer at pickup and drop off. 7 days hard stop. If you don't bring it back on time or in one piece, you will talk to Ruth. Not me. He huffed out something that wasn't quite a laugh. You wrote all that already. I've learned to write before I feel, I said. It keeps the feelings honest. He read it carefully. My son, who used to skim directions and build lopsided bookcases, tracing each line with his thumb. When he reached the end, he lifted his backpack onto his lap, pulled out an envelope, and slid a card across the table. Proof, he said. I called yesterday like you told me. Non-owner liability effective at noon. If the state makes me add SR 22, I'll do it the minute they say. I checked the dates. The policy number, the name embossed where it belonged his. The boy who once handed me permission slips at midnight now handing me a document on time. I uncoupled a single key from my ring, the one with the grocery store tag, and a nickel I had punched a hole through years ago, and set it on the table. He didn't reach for it. One more thing, I said. From the folder, I produced a second page, 2 paragraphs, and a signature line, acknowledgement of responsibility for temporary use of vehicle. It named the car, the dates, the rules, and it named him, not me.
Nos.
Him, he signed, he dated. He slid the paper back with both hands. A ceremony more reverent than any table grace we ever managed. Thank you, he said, and the key disappeared into his palm with relief and weight. We didn't stay long after that. The coffee had cooled and the night pressed its forehead to the glass. At the door he hesitated, as if a question still needed asking. Do you forgive me? He said. I considered the word, how cheaply it gets spent when people are tired. Forgiveness is bigger than tonight, I answered. Tonight is about the rules that make forgiveness possible. Outside, the air was clear enough to draw lines in. I tucked the signed paper into the folder, felt the brass fastener bite shut, and slid it under my arm. He headed for the bus stop, choosing to walk the last distance. I turned toward the lot. As I stepped off the curb, I said the lesson to myself the way you say a phone number. You cannot afford to forget. Respect isn't a gift. It's a set of terms you state and keep. I didn't look back at the booth where our old story had ended. I looked ahead, to the truck that was mine alone, to a week measured in odometer photos and court receipts, to a horizon where the work of holding a boundary might, if tended, make room for the work of letting go. Outro. Thank you for spending time with this story on Telling Story with me. If you're standing in a similar storm, remember, put everything in writing, protect your name, don't sign what you don't control, and treat boundaries like doors with locks, not walls. You deserve safety and self-respect. If this episode helped, please share it with someone who might need a nudge to set a boundary. Comment below, what line would you draw in her shoes? Have you ever had to reclaim your name from a paper trap? Your stories help others feel less alone. Tap like to support the channel, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next chapter. If this resonated, save the video to revisit later, and send it to one friend who needs it today.